This is going to be take 4 of this video because I got so distracted so many times and had to pause it and restart it in the last iteration of this video. And I think it makes the video worse, and I don't want to do that to people. I don't want to talk about how I'm afraid someone's listening to me, how my cat's distracting me, how there's a train horn in the background, how I have to have the noise on so I feel like it drowns out my voice, even though that defeats the purpose, because if it were actually loud enough to drown out my voice, then nobody would be able to hear me. But anyway, so I had this thought about what would make me happy, because people who listen to this channel generally know that I'm not a happy camper. I do complain, but in my opinion, I don't really feel like that's just complaining, like, you know, just for its own sake. Like, I feel like I'm venting, so I don't feel like that's a bad thing. But even beside that, like, anyone who listens to this basically knows that, you know, I suffer from depression and anxiety, and not in some sort of a calling attention to myself kind of way. It's something that I deal with, you know. So I had this dream the other night. I wrote it down. Well, I try to keep a notebook next to my bed, and for some reason it went away. I don't know, like I went to the other room with it. I need to keep it by my bed so I can write my dreams down when I wake up, because already I really don't feel like doing that after I get up. So it's kind of a discipline, you know. But I had this dream that I had an apartment, and it was like I realized that I had more room in the apartment than I realized. So it would be kind of like if in real life I woke up and I realized that somehow this studio apartment that I live in had a bunch of extra rooms. But more importantly, so that was nice. Like, and it wasn't like a weird dream where like, oh no, I have extra rooms, and then you're suddenly panicked. But in real life, that would be a good thing, because dreams are weird, you know. But in the dream, it was like a good thing. But the better part was like, I realized I was at the end of something, and it was kind of like when you're about to finish college. Ironically, I've never done that. But the way you would generally feel, like some people would be sad because college is like the best years of their life. But the way I would feel, I think, is basically like, oh good, we're finishing this unpleasantness and we're moving on, you know, we're graduating. And that was the feeling that I had. So I think there's you can draw an analogy to real life from that perspective and say that. And it was a very good feel. What I'm saying is, like, I felt really relieved and happy in the dream, you know. I don't know necessarily what it signified, but so that would sort of be happiness to me. And I'm not suggesting like, oh, I have to die. I'm just saying, like, if you are at a point where it's like, okay, now this is making sense, you know. I've related this anecdote before, but I'm just going to quickly say it again, relating to the topic of this video. And I'm trying to make my videos a little bit more to the point, you know. So one time I was talking to my therapist, who I no longer see. There were certain things that seemed to kind of go over her head, as I've talked about. I don't remember what we were talking about, but I was, you know, complaining about something. She could tell that I wasn't super happy. And she said to me, she asked me, what would make you happy right now? And I don't really know what she expected me to say, but I think she expected something a little more grounded, you know, like, well, I want to be in the city. Like, if I were in the city right now, I'd be happy. Or something like, well, you know, if I had a girlfriend, maybe that I would be happy. Or like, if I had, you know, some really good chocolate or something like that. And I gave an answer that she didn't expect and gave a very muted response to, as I've talked about. But I said to her, well, what would make me happy right now is if I felt like all of this suffering that I've endured and continue to endure had a meaning behind it. There was a reason for this, and it didn't just all feel meaningless and nihilistic, because that's a compounding factor. Like, you're already kind of depressed because you're not a successful person. You're lonely and stuff like that. And you might be thinking, well, you're projecting. You mean you? No, I mean people in general. I'm talking about myself, but I'm saying a lot of people feel this way. So you might feel unhappy because like I said, you're not successful, or you don't have a girlfriend or companionship or whatever. But I can sort of tell people, and you can see this from certain examples. Like, just for an example, Kurt Cobain. Why did he do that? Was it because he was happy and content? And there are other examples. Kate Spade. That's really even a better example, in my opinion. I don't know what she suffered with, but that as far as we could tell, she didn't suffer from any ill health. And she was very successful. Why did she choose to do that? So I can tell you and anyone else that whatever it is that my therapist was asking, that ain't it. I could be a millionaire. There's a reason I haven't pursued that. And I don't mean this in any sort of boastful way, but a lot of people could if that were really their goal and their focus, especially in this country. I mean, it's harder than ever to do that. But you could become a millionaire. But even if I had like $10 million, I lived in the city, which is where I'd prefer to live, and all kinds of stuff like that, it wouldn't make me happy. It wouldn't make me feel like, oh, good, everything's good now, So, and that goes for a lot of people. I don't know the type of person who is happy when they attain those things, but there are certain people, and then you can add, like, obviously if you have family and you have like a son or daughter or whatever, that will help you. But even then, if you have a certain type of personality, you're going to feel an emptiness, and it's not going to be necessarily solved by having family. I used to have family, and I was happier. I felt like things were a little bit more normal, But I don't think that's the answer, not by itself. So we've all heard of this. I say we. I think anyone who's subbed to me has probably heard of the allegory of the cave, which is basically, I'm not going to say the whole thing, because it's slightly more elaborate than you might even suspect. But, and by the way, it's sort of the basis of the name of my new channel, which I still may change, because I don't like the sort of serious nature of it. I'd rather have it be something whimsical. But when I typed it in, Google accepted it, and I was like, wow, nobody has this handle yet? Okay, I'll take it, I guess. So that's why I have There Is Another World. But and it's a quote from a Paul Eluard poem. But so anyway, he was a surrealist poet. So the allegory of the cave. So a bunch of people are in a cave, and they don't realize that they're trapped. This all necessitates a bunch of suspension of disbelief, because obviously you can't be a human and be in chains and just be like, oh, this is nice. You have to imagine it as an allegory. So people don't realize that they're living in a simulation. And, obviously the Matrix is a good allegory for the allegory. It's basically a playing out to some extent of the allegory of the cave. So my whole thing is like, part of the allegory of the cave is like, what if someone escapes and then they see reality, and the idea, like, you're red pilled, oh, I'm awake, I'm one of the smart people or of the awake people, and I see the true reality. The way I feel about it is, I don't really know that any of us living on Earth is awake in that sense. To me, it feels like if this is even true, if this is the way that reality really is, which is what wish, that's my wish, then, I don't really feel like any of us are awake. Who of us has escaped Plato's cave? I don't know that anyone does until they die. And then, you don't know what the fuck happens anyway. And that's why I'm so obsessed with near-death experiences, because some of these people, some of them are so fake that it's kind of amusing. It's really kind of destructive, and it's all over YouTube. But I've seen so many of them and consumed so much of this content since I was about 12. So that goes back to 1991. That I'm really pretty good at spotting the fake ones, and there are some that have some fake content. Anytime there's a reference to Jesus or the Archangel Michael, or, I saw the Buddha, something like that, it's a little bit of a red flag. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's fake, but it's like a red flag. Okay, like, what are we talking about? Like, where it's a child and he saw Jesus and stuff like that. It's like, I don't even know what you're talking about, and I don't really believe this, But some of them are absolutely authentic, in my opinion. And these are people that seem to think that they experienced a genuine other realm, and that they will graduate, speaking of graduating, to that realm when they're, retired from this life. And also that generally it seems to be something not only better, but more real. Like, whatever this reality is that we're living through is somewhat dreamlike in comparison. So what would make me happy is if I felt that were actually the case, and that the suffering that I endure, and I do endure it, weren't meaningless, and it wasn't just like, oh, I'm just another schlub, and like, I'm just gonna die alone, and like, nothing means anything. So I don't even mean to say that like, oh, I'll be happy once I'm dead. I don't mean it like that. I mean it like, if I knew that there were something beyond, and that this reality that already feels to me kind of absurd, and that's partly why I have a good sense of humor, and well, that's sort of subjective, but I tend to take things lightly, and I tend to find the humor in a lot of things, let's just put it that way. So that's part of the reason that I do that, is because I find so much of this life absurd, and frankly really kind of dreamlike, and sort of and illusory. I think that maybe that was the word I was trying to think of, I don't know. But so what would make me happy is if I realized, if I knew, and then, you can kind of say, well, you think that, but if you actually knew, it would break the illusion, and the whole point of your life would be lost, So that could be, I don't really know. But I know that a lot of the suffering that I deal with is not even so much a matter of like, oh, I don't have a girlfriend, and I'm poor, and I don't want to be out here. I'd rather be in the city. Yeah, there are certain like goals that that I have, or however you want to say it. But that's not really the source of the problem. The source of the problem is that everyone dies. There's suffering, so much immense suffering in this world, that I have a problem with. Like, if I were like super good looking and rich and stuff, it would be like, that's awesome. But the fact is, there's so many people who are suffering terribly. So that's partly what I think about when I think about someone like Bill Gates. And you can say that he's a sociopath. I don't know. I can't, diagnose him. But to the extent that I even know him at all, I would think like, it's nice that you have $200 billion and you founded Microsoft and stuff, but like, how can you actually be happy when you see the rest of the country that you live in such so many people in such misery, partly because of the increasing wealth disparity. Like, how can you be okay with that? It doesn't matter how much money you have, because again, we get this message from the media. And it may sound like, well, that's not what they say. They say, like, you need $75,000 a year to be comfortable or something like that. But yeah, implicitly, we get messages emphasizing how important money is. And the ironic part about that is, like, think about the most illusory thing you can think of that literally just symbolizes something. It's not even anything. You know, you can have a dollar bill and enjoy the artwork and look at it and be like, oh, look, it's George Washington, and then there's a weird pyramid on the back. That has meaning. But it does. Money itself is, it's like a will-o'-the-wisp, you know? It's like representing something. And somehow we've put all of our energy into this thing as if it's like super duper important, you know? And I think when you get some of these annoying, like, Reddit types of people and they're talking about anti-capitalism, that, you know, they're not sophisticated enough to know what they're really talking about, but viscerally, that's what they're responding to. And I don't really have respect for money. I have respect for it as a tool, but this idea that I need to have $1 billion because it's so important, you know? And then I can control a bunch of other people. I can, like, shout at people. I can act mean. I can basically buy a wife because certain people are that shallow that they'll be like, I'm going to go with the guy who has $1 billion because of that, you know? And then I can be comfortable. I don't really care about what I feel about him and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what would make me happy, is to know that this all had a meaning behind it, and maybe even an orchestration in a way. And to be honest, that's sort of what I lean a little bit towards. I was watching this, the Y-Files, The Basement thing, where it's like a podcast. He doesn't want to call it a podcast for some reason, but he was interviewing this Indian guy, and the Indian guy, I was a little skeptical because I'm tired of the Indian stuff, you know, but it turned out to be a really enlightening interview, and the guy was basically echoing a lot of things that I've already thought about, you know, like concepts. Like at one point he said, and to be honest, I don't really agree with this, but it's sort of like food for thought. But he was saying maybe the people, and this is coming from a privileged person, you could say, well, he's Indian, so he's on the DEI, he's on this level of the pyramid of victimization, you know. But he wasn't thinking about it that way, and he grew up privileged. He may have grown up, you know, not wealthy in any way. But if you grow up as smart as he is, you are already privileged, essentially, you know, because to be born, well, actually, you can be happy and be stupid too. So, but there is a type of luck that's involved if you're born smart, and you can go to MIT or whatever, you know, you're smart enough to go to MIT. But so this is coming from someone who is basically pretty lucky in life. He had all sorts of investments. I don't know what the fuck he is. He's probably a billionaire. I don't give a shit. But anyway, I mean, it's relevant to what I'm saying. But he was saying, you know, maybe life is sort of like, it's a game. Well, that was his whole, like, shtick, is that he felt that, like, life was possibly a game, kind of like the Matrix, you know, like, and what Elon Musk talks about, like, it's a simulation, and it's literally like some sort of coded simulation that's just insanely complex, you know. But he was saying that, you know, maybe the people with the hardest lives are the people that they're sort of like the top players, like they're toward the end of the game, you know, and they're, in a way, they're much more advanced than the people who have easier lives and the people who are born rich and handsome, and whatever it is to you that would make someone's life basically like pretty good, and they didn't have to suffer a lot. But anyway, so it's been about 20 minutes now. I don't want to keep it any longer than that because this is a relatively short topic anyway. But that's basically what would make me feel happy, is if I felt that behind this suffering, and it's not just me. I'm only saying that because I know I'm talking about it, Obviously it's not just me. But like behind all of this suffering, there was like some sort of orchestrated thing where like there was meaning behind it, and it wasn't meaningless in the way that it really feels. Because like I said, that's a compounding factor. So like already, you lost your mom, you lost your dad, you lost your wife, you lost whoever. You lost your looks or something. You lost this and that you didn't even realize how much you appreciated having it around until you lost it and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, it all feels meaningless. That's what really makes people feel empty and like they don't want to be here anymore, So that's what would make me happy, to answer her question in a long-winded way. And I think it would make a lot of other people feel happy. I don't know if it's universal, because I think a lot of people seem to feel like, again, Donald Trump, I just give that as an example. It really has very little to do with him as a political figure. I just see him as the type of person who's in this sort of game. He likes to win. He likes to keep his money going. He loves making deals and bullshitting with people. That's his happiness, So to me, it doesn't seem like there's much more to it than that. I don't know if I'm underestimating him or whatever, because I don't know him personally. But there are those people. But I think there are also a lot of people that are like me, and they feel like everything feels vaguely dreamlike and illusory. And yet you don't know what's beyond, and that's what's frustrating about it. And at the same time, that may be the key to what makes it meaningful, ironically. But anyway, so I'll probably make another video later. I've been a little bit distracted this whole time. I've tried to sort of conceal it. But anyway, thanks for listening and have a good day.